I'm not going to opine on whether a UP-NS merger is a good idea, bad idea, or whatever. That's not for me to say. But what I will say is those on the side of wanting the merger keep talking about truckload conversion, the sort of watershed markets, and those against the merger keep talking about intermodal growth. That is just those facts alone. The fact that the railroads are coming along, recognizing even though the intermodal margins are never quite as cushy as these carload margins are with stone, sand, and gravel and coal and all that, but it is a reliable source of business. Having them, everybody affected by the merger saying that is huge.
I'm Kristy Knichel, and this is Inside Track, where I talk with leaders and industry experts about trends, insights, and challenges that are shaping transportation today. So welcome to the show. Today, my guest is Anne Reinke, the CEO and president of the IANA, the Intermodal Association of North America. Thank you for being on with me today.
Thank you, Kristy. So good to see you. Even if we are not in the same room, we're still seemingly together.
Well, that's so nice of you to say. I agree. I was going to say it's been a while since I have even talked to you or have even seen you. So
we're having a renaissance.
Yes, exactly. I love that. So, Anne, one thing that stands out to me, about your career is how many different perspectives you've had over the years. You've worked in government. You've spent 16 years working at CSX, which is a little crazy to me. That's a long time. You've also served as a CEO at TIA, which is where I first met you, amazingly, working on the Intermodal committee. And then now you're the current CEO of IANA. So that's obviously a unique journey that you've had in leadership over time. So, since you've been in so many different angles of the transportation industry, I'd love for you to start from the beginning. How did you find your way in the transportation industry? And what were some key moments that led you to where you are today?
My career journey is haphazard at best, which I think is good. People talk about having 5-year plans or 10-year plans. And really, come on, don't have a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan because life is going to laugh at you. And it's just going to suggest that there's another path that you're going to take. So I was a lawyer. I went to law school. I did not care for law school. And then I worked as a lawyer for a year and I didn't care for that either. And so for you just paid 3 years like of student loans for a career that you don't like. That seems terrible. So I thought, what else could I do? And, lobbying is advocacy a different way. It's sort of like sales is advocacy. You're advocating for a product. Lobbying is advocacy. You're lobbying for an idea, an issue, a company. And advocacy is, in a court of law, advocating for your client. So it's they're all sort of similar. If you think about it, they're practicing the same skill set. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to translate advocacy into lobbying. And I had a couple of different small jobs first. And why railroads? There's literally no reason. I saw a letter to the editor from a guy who became my boss. It was like, we should use trains more. And I was like, oh yeah, we should use trains more. And so I went and I introduced myself to him and I said, I'm a lawyer and I'm looking for a new career. And he hired me. So, I think having that law degree actually was helpful because at least it seemed like I was not crazy and I had some education. But I ended up at CSX for 16 years and I would have spent the rest of my career there. I loved it. Every day was different. I mean, the worst part of CSX is things go bump in the night. Unfortunately, no one could be doing anything wrong, but something happens. So that was certainly stressful, but it was just so exciting. And I believed in the cause and all of that. But, what happened with CSX is it happens to many companies. There's a change in leadership. The old leadership is fired and the new leadership takes on a new personality and they don't necessarily like the old folk. And so, what? I said, maybe it's time for me to try something new. And I got into government and that was a terrific experience because it just broadened my perspective I was so rail focused and it provided an opportunity to get the job at TIA because I actually learned different modes that I had not learned at all. When you're in CSX world and you're just so rail intensive and then broadening that out, I got to learn a lot more. So from some changing that, lifelong thought that that's where I was going to live and die and retire and all that stuff has been so enormously good because it challenged me. I could have been comfortable just being at CSX for the rest of my life, but instead I was radically uncomfortable working for the government first and then becoming a CEO of an organization and learning all the kind of intricacies of all the issues. And you know this, Kristy, because you're so tightly affiliated with the TIA. There's a lot going on in that space, particularly these days, but in general, there's like mom and pop shops. You literally turned on the lights yesterday, and they're legacy companies that have been around for 50 years and everything in between. And they all have very interesting and different issues. So that was learning a whole new language. And so my point is, in this long way of saying it is, I hadn't planned any of that. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Here I am now, the CEO of IANA. And it just was like the most circuitous path, but I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And before we talk a little bit more about the role that you're in today, I'd love to understand, some of the key experiences that really shaped how you lead today. Like, as you mentioned, you just came into that CEO role at TIA and never had been in that role before. So any defining people or moments that were in your career that really inspired, your approach to leadership?
Yeah. So, and I want to hear your perspective too, because you are a CEO as well, and you had to become a CEO. So it's different how each person sort of approaches it. My approach was a couple of things. One is I had such incredible leadership modeled to me by some bosses that I had at CSX. And I thought, okay, the sort of moral compass of my boss at CSX was something that I wanted to emulate. And so I thought, all right, my first core principle is going to be integrity. The second core principle for me was humility. I read this book about leadership to get prepared for the role. It was called Humble Leadership. And I thought, my goodness, this makes sense. First of all, humble leadership means you don't have to have all the answers. Also, you can rely on your team, and you have the humility to admit that you have people who might know something more than you about a particular issue. And I thought, well, I that kind of puts a little less pressure on you as a leader, knowing that you don't have to be good at everything. The whole point is to lead a team and make them be better too, and help them make the organization better. And then the last thing was transparency. When I started at TIA, and you may know this, there had been a longtime leader, and there were some issues there where the board didn't necessarily feel like they knew everything that was going on internally. And I thought, we need to change that dynamic. We need to have a greater sense of communication so the board understands what's going on with the organization understands what's going on with the board, and that we're all communicating and all aligned. What was sort of formative for you?
So interesting. I had a totally different experience because I think, as you know, I was 19 working for my dad for the first time. And my dad was a great salesperson, started the company, God bless him. That was a challenge in itself. But as I worked every role moving up in the company, to be honest, I mean, he didn't really know how to necessarily like truly run a business. I mean, he knew enough, obviously, to get us to a certain point. But I had him as a mentor to an extent, but he was more that sales based, not really how you're dealing with employees, learning all that kind of stuff. I also quit college too. So I did not get any kind of learning from there that would have helped me, right? Along the way, though, I will say, I struggled reaching out, asking for help, because I felt like at one point when my dad did put me in that role, I really didn't know what a CEO did. I literally Googled, what does a CEO do? Because I couldn't figure out, like, what am I supposed to be doing? My dad's not even telling me. And I mean, I did convince him at one point to get me a consultant to work with to kind of talk me through that and what are the things I should be looking at. I did convince him to also put myself and my brother through a leadership, or not leadership, but more sales type course to really help us even understand that about business as well. Because I really wasn't a salesperson either, but I became a salesperson, obviously, through my journey. So it was really tough for me. I would say probably in like 2017 was when I really just was like, I'm just going to start calling other CEOs as well and just really ask the question, like, what are some of the things that I need to be looking at and doing? I know it was about surrounding yourself with people better than you. And I understood that, but I think I didn't understand that for a long time. And I felt I had to know everything. And I had to do everything, and I didn't want to feel stupid when I called someone asking that question that was already in that seat. So to your point with the humility, like getting to that point where you really understood, like, it doesn't bother me that I don't know something. I've learned so much by building my network and reaching out to people and not being afraid to ask the questions. So it was really like learning by trial for the
Yeah.
most part. And when I was younger, I mean, I've been in the industry 30 years. So I really didn't have any kind of support system early on. There wasn't a whole lot of that in our industry. There wasn't a whole lot of women in our industry either. So it really was a challenge, to be quite honest. And I will say today, I feel so much more comfortable in the role that I am in. But as we continue to grow and scale, it is about talking to those CEOs and mentors that are out there, which I have several mentors, but that truly then work with you and you know they've made it to that level that you want to get to. I think that's the most important thing as our company's growing. You know, if I want to get to 300 million, which is a goal that we have, like talking to the people that have done it. What do I need to be looking at? You know, so definitely a little bit different journey for me where, you know, learning really the hard way, to be quite honest.
I mean, all of it though is that you're learning as you go, and if you're open to that, that to me is what is so important, because there are plenty of people who are like, they see it's almost a security thing, like I've got to be right, I've got to be right, no one can argue with me, I've got to be right. And it, you know, your story shows that you're open to whatever kind of feedback that could potentially help you, can help the company. That to me is the most important attribute, I think, of a good leader.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I feel like sometimes I'm not the best leader I can be now, but I'm doing everything I can to be that leader and bring in outside resources, right? Like a CEO coach and
Yeah, right. I had a coach. Yeah,
exactly. So I've had that now for 3 years, and those coaches that work with me and my COO, we're bringing in actually next week to work with our whole leadership team.
that's great.
So yeah, so I'm excited about that, but it was definitely a challenging journey, but that's okay. You know, we learn by making mistakes and trying to figure things out. So
Yeah. What else are you going to do with your time, right?
I know exactly. So by the time you stepped into your role late in 2024, obviously you've built an impressive career. I mean, you're just so amazing. I hope you know that, by the way. But having led TIA for several years, advocating for transportation in the industry, you've brought definitely a different perspective to TIA, and I'm already seeing a little bit of that now with IANA. But what motivated you to take on this challenge? You know, what were your priorities and maybe opportunities that you were most excited to tackle?
Sure. So I did not, kind of the same thing with TIA. I thought I'm not going to be here for 20 years, but I didn't have an end in sight in my mind. When I got approached about IANA, I thought, oh, well, I think they have a couple candidates that they're kind of preferring, but they're probably just trying to open up the field, just, you know, just to see, like, have a diversity of candidates. So I was like, all right, I'll talk. I'd talk to anybody. But the more I got along, the more I was like, oh, they're making it sound like I could go kind of back to my rail roots a little bit, which I missed. I mean, I hate to say that, but it's kind of like 16 years. It was a really formative experience, and it got in my blood a little bit. And I thought, you know, TIA is doing great. They've got a really good guy who could take over. Maybe this is the offer I can't refuse. Maybe I should just throw my hat in the ring for IANA. So it's not something I planned, and it was a little bit sooner maybe than I would have liked, and maybe sooner than the board would have liked, but it kind of came up and it just turned into this thing like, well, I think this is the right move. TIA is in good stead. We got a good leader to take over. This is something for me to change. With IANA, you know, there's the same leader there for 27 years who did a phenomenal job, and you know her. She did a phenomenal job really building the organization financially to be sound, to be the industry's voice, so to speak. But over the years, it had become less visible, and they hired me because they thought, you know, obviously I've got a Capitol Hill background and things like that. Like I could make it more visible. I could really bring more attention to it from an externally facing perspective. You know, some leaders like to be internally facing and I'm really good at that. Like, you know, Jody was, and some people like to be externally facing. And so that was my challenge. It's like, all right, we got to take this organization into the 21st century and really have people know about it. Like when I went to some meetings on Capitol Hill, when newly the president of IANA, I was talking about IANA, and people just didn't know it.
Yeah.
You know, Capitol Hill is not everything, but it sure is helpful when you have legislation that passes that affects your industry and you're not anywhere part of it. That's a problem. You got to be. You got to be part of that conversation. And so that was kind of, where I first have decided to make the mark.
Now, I love that. One thing that TIA has taught me, if you're not on the Hill advocating for your company, someone's on the Hill advocating against your company or your industry.
100%.
Yeah, so that's important. And I will say too, when you left TIA to go to IANA, I did get a few phone calls from people who are like, who is this Anne Reinke? Do you know who she is? And I said, she's amazing. You're definitely not going to, have any issues here. We were excited, obviously, to have you come over to the intermodal side, since that's the biggest piece of what we do too. And I agree with you. There's so much that needs to be done that just wasn't getting done. And to your point, bringing it into the modern era, which I appreciate. And I think one of the things that was so important too is once you join, you spent a lot of time connecting with members. You did a lot of traveling. So when thinking about intermodal, like I've seen this industry twist and turn into, I call it like a roller coaster, right? It's up, it's down, it's going off the rails at times. So I'm sure you can relate to that. And when you look at where intermodal is today, what are some of the biggest opportunities and also the biggest challenges that you are seeing and hearing from the industry right now and or members?
Well, the biggest opportunity, I think, is the moment we're in, Kristy, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but business is picking up. And part of it is not just pricing. There's some real capacity constraints. And so the domestic intermodal has gone up. I think we were almost in double digits last month. And it's because you have capacity being shed for both financial reasons, right? Motor carriers getting out of the business, but also for regulatory reasons, both the Montgomery case, which I'm sure we can talk about, meaning broker liability. And there's this concern about if you're a conditional rated driver, would you as a broker hire a conditional rated driver? And most brokers don't want to take that chance, right? And then the CDL enforcement, non-domiciled CDL enforcement, that has put some constraints on sort of the driving population. And so there's this movement to intermodal. Then couple that with, I did not organize this, the Straits of Hormuz being blockaded for as long as it was. That means gas prices shoot up and there's just less cushion when you're dealing with a truck, about a fuel surcharge than there is with railroads, just because they can spread the cost far better. And so intermodal, becomes an attractive play. I think that the challenge is how do we sustain that growth? Because, we were really good in 2019 and then we dipped to like 4.5% of market share. And so if we dip back up, how can we make sure we keep the capacity, keep the shipper community who had not used us and now are using us? We don't want to have them go back to truck again. So how do we do that? And that's the challenge.
Yeah. And I would say that's how I feel too. The same thing. Like if they have a bad experience now, any kind of truckload conversion that they didn't do intermodal before and they have one bad experience, they're going to say, this is why we're not going to do it anymore, even if they have the savings. And so I think this time will be the time for the railroads to show not only can, from a service standpoint, but can they provide the equipment? But to your point, the biggest issue we're seeing as an intermodal provider out there is the drayage capacity. Yeah. And a lot of the carriers we've talked to, the points you brought up at the non-domiciled driver situation, obviously that was a lot of some of these fleets, it seems, out there. And even if you can get the box now, you can't find the carrier that can actually haul the business for you. So we've actually brought someone on our team a couple weeks ago specifically for dray procurement. Wow. To really, it's a full-time job and it's definitely helping. But I think customers understand, but the prices on the truckload side are so significant. I think that they're okay weathering that storm right now. But to your point, is that going to be okay, once maybe things settle down a little bit? And I don't know that they're going to settle down anytime soon. So I'm excited, though, because we've had some significant growth last year. And then this year, it's even, probably, 60% over last year.
Wow. Wow.
Yes, significant numbers. So my hope is that stays and we can continue to convince customers why it's so important to keep, intermodal in their tool belt, as we say.
Well, let me compliment you, just you personally, but also, the function of an intermodal marketing company and IMC. You guys are the linchpin to making intermodal work, because intermodal seems to some in the shipping community, it seems like a black box. It doesn't have visibility. They don't understand. It seems like it's complicated. You are the one who is really making it comprehensible and visible and understandable. And so, we have this PR campaign that our board has invested in. We're just starting we just finished, the research phase. It'll be interesting to hear what has been concluded. Just the preliminary results are that those folks who don't use intermodal, they just think it's too complicated. And so as we think about that, we think, all right, if they turn to intermodal, how do we retain them? To me, the IMC is such a part of that growth. Like, we've got to grow, and you need the IMC to be, talking to the railroads, convincing them to really be a partner, as opposed to just, a business relationship. You really want to be partners with each other.
Right.
And so that's so important. So IMC, to me, it's like you have never been more critical as we think about growth.
Well, it's interesting. You kind of brought up a point to my next question, was obviously raising the awareness of intermodal transportation, which we're doing and working with the railroads. And I will say, working with the Union Pacific, and I just told them this past week, they're our biggest vendor on the railroad, but it's probably been the best relationship we've seen in years, or probably my whole career, to be honest.
Wow.
As far as working with us as partners and really trying to help us. And I think, hats off to the leadership team for truly trying to work together with IMCs, whether it's talking to customers together when you're going on trips, and really trying to find ways to be competitive, or them just investing in their network so that they're really getting more of that truck-like service. I know on the other side, some of these other companies don't want to see that truck business go on the railroad, but I do think there's a benefit to putting as much business as we can on the railroads to get that traffic off the roads and those longer miles, obviously. But with that being said, what are some of the misconceptions that you're hearing out there, and what are some of the most common examples maybe you can see day to day as to why you think these perceptions still exist, even after efforts, like companies like us are trying to debunk these, exceptions, other than the fact that you already mentioned, like, they do think it's very complicated to do.
Yeah, I think they think that it's not visible at all. And there's some shippers who just don't, they're like, I don't know what happens. Our container goes somewhere and then it ends up somewhere else, and we have no idea what happens in the meantime. And I really do think that is changing. Railroads have been reticent in the past of providing visibility into, where their trains are, where their containers are, et cetera. I do think that is really changing. Part of it is because the customer expectation has enhanced so much. It's like the Amazon effect, right? There is this expectation that you have to know where things are. And I think there's a gradual awareness of that. But the other part of it is, it's like technology makes it inevitable. There are so many technology solutions that IMCs in particular are investing in that provide that kind of level of visibility. So this is not something that's invisible that you have no idea where anything is, because really no one can counteract the force of technology. It's impossible. So that to me means this is not like, look, our industry has never been, early adopters of technology. We're not the cool people in the nice shiny suits and fun shoes, but that is changing. And I think that's important for there to be a recognition of that. There are many, and you know this, Kristy, there are too many shippers who associate railroads somehow with like steam locomotives, or they don't think about them other than the carload business, like they think of coal or what have you. They don't recognize like the most vital and growing segment of a railroad's traffic mix is intermodal.
Right.
And so, that's something that we have to impress upon people. And I think, doing it together, we can.
Yeah, now I agree. I think that's so important. I was just talking about this recently, how the majority of the units out there that we use as an IMC with the railroads have been equipped with GPS. There's geofencing now that's in place to, where is this, driver, located in your facility or not in your facility. I know it's been behind the times, so to speak, but that's not the case anymore. So, I agree 100%. And, I think to your point, we just have to keep talking and talking about it with our customers so that they're aware of why it is so important. You can see where your freight is, and there's a lot of benefits to doing it.
I was just going to say, we bring them in with a low price point and we keep them with the service. And rail
Yeah.
services, has not ever been better. It is really consistently good. If we can all recognize, I think, on how important growth is. So we got to get over this 4.5% hump and shoot it back up to where it was. That to me is when it really has become a game changer.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So, I mean, looking ahead, like when you think about where intermodal is headed today, what excites you most about the future? And from everything that we're seeing in the industry now, like where do you think the biggest opportunities are for growth? And what do you think will be the most, important in helping in the industry, to continue to evolve and stay? I know we stay connected, but I know we kind of talked about that in staying competitive, actually. Because I think that's always been the challenge. I think maybe a couple of years ago was the first time we saw, as an example, like out of the LA market, you never typically see truckload cheaper going out of LA to New Jersey, for example. So I think that's one of the things is staying competitive with truckload, keeping up with so that they can actually get the volume moved with the transit times that are not taking forever as well.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple things. One, from a sort of, I don't know, market-based regulatory perspective, I'm not going to opine on whether a UP-NS merger is a good idea, bad idea, or whatever. That's not for me to say. But what I will say is those on the side of wanting the merger keep talking about truckload conversion, the sort of watershed markets, and those against the merger keep talking about intermodal growth. That is just those facts alone, the fact that the railroads are coming along, recognizing even though the intermodal margins are never quite as cushy as these carload margins are with stone, sand, and gravel and coal and all that, but it is a reliable source of business. Having them, everybody affected by the merger saying that is huge. And so let's continue to harness that. Let's talk about that and how we can make that growth a really, really viable thing. Because if you've ever been to, there's conferences there's one called Rail Trends. I don't know if you've ever been to Rail Trends,
Yep.
but there's, they have these analysts talk about how there's been flat growth, flat volume, in the railroads for a decade. Like, come on, everybody. We can't do that. That's not a way to grow. We can't sustain our business like that. So the fact that they're all talking about that is terrific. Then the other kind of really exciting development is there is a lot of AV tech going on in the rail space, whether it's an AV trailer, AV chassis, an AV, basically a container that can ride on the rails without anybody on it, and all this stuff that is happening is really, really exciting, because what that means is we've got a new crop of people who are being attracted to this space, and that having a lot of new energy and some venture capital money for some of these companies, that is really, really cool. And because that puts more eyeballs and more visibility on our space, and people get more interested in it,
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about too is, since you came to the IANA, you created a new, is it a department that works with the government now?
Oh
on the
yeah, government
advocacy
affairs.
side?
Yeah.
Yeah, the government affairs. So how did that come along, and how is that working so far? And like, are you seeing any benefits from that? This year, obviously.
Yeah. So how I mentioned it, like when I first started, when I went to Capitol Hill and nobody knew who we were, I said to myself, and I says, we can't have this. We cannot have this. We must be up there. And so look, I'm joking sort of, but it's always been important. To your point, if you're not up there, somebody else is talking about you or trying to elbow you out of the way. So, and it's not the only way, but it's another way to get visibility. So having that person who can, herd cats to some extent, because we have a lot of very diffuse and variated memberships, right? We have the dray carriers, we have the railroads, we have the IMCs, we have the chassis providers, we have the ports and marine terminal operators. So all of these folks may not agree on much, but they agree on a robust supply chain. They agree on things like cargo theft. They agree on there should be surface transportation bill that provides intermodal connector funding. There are things that we can work on. And so we need to be up there. And here's one other thing I'd say about government affairs is that because we don't represent any one mode, we represent all the modes. We can be a little bit dispassionate, and so you can trust what we're saying, and that we're actually just thinking about the health of the supply chain as opposed to these sort of provincial interests of a particular mode, because it's like how we all can work together. And so it's been really, really a cool thing to be part of that, and bringing together a department, like growing a department, forming a government affairs committee, all of that stuff. So it's like little baby steps, but we're going to be cool. I can't wait.
That's awesome. So do you think that you'll expand and kind of have something similar to TIA where you have members that can come with you and advocate? Or I'm not sure how that would work, but
Yeah, I hope to, because most of our companies, the ocean vessels and the railroads and the larger companies have their own government affairs folk. And so if we can have a representative from all those various companies come up and just talk about the supply chain and talk about those really like bread and butter issues where you don't have much opposition, which is so fabulous. It's like people aren't mad at you because they're like, oh, I want a functioning supply chain. Sure, I do. I want to get my toilet paper. Bringing those people together, I would love to do an intermodal day on the hill. We're not there yet. I think, what do we think, Kristy? 2029, maybe we'll be able to do it.
now I get it. You're just getting it off the ground, but I think it's absolutely amazing because it's something that is needed. And for you to grow, or all of us to grow intermodal, I think it's important that we do help advocate and, whatever that means to get us in a better position so that we can keep it going and growing.
Yeah,
Because it is a very, very small piece of the full supply chain that's out there.
it is.
Still a big piece, like when you look at the numbers overall, but definitely a very small piece. So, but as we wrap things up, one thing I would love to hear basically is, what do you think your legacy will be? Because you've been in the industry for so long, have a huge, long track record being in leadership. And I'm sure you have so many people that you look up to and look at you as a role model, to be quite honest. I mean, I feel like I look at you as a role model to me, and I want to grow up and be just like you, Anne, and be able to lead better even in my company. But what do you think that legacy would be? And are there any role models, that you have too, that you've looked up to?
Well, so I mentioned my old boss at CSX, and she no longer works there. But what was incredible about her was, in addition to being formidable, she was so bright, and she would challenge people to think just a little differently, not just come to the easiest conclusion, just think through, all right, what should we be doing? And she just did a phenomenal job. If I had to think about my legacy, I don't know if I'll ever be as formidable as she, but I do think that people realize that I am a trusted voice, that I will be honest with them, that I will tell them my viewpoint without sort of hiding behind, oh, this is what the railroads think, or this is what, the dray carriers think. It's like, this is honestly what probably should happen. I really want to be that person. I think that will be my legacy, that I'm a nice person, but I'm also an honest person. And I want to kind of put that on everybody. Like, I'm so tired of people just being disagreeable for the sake of being disagreeable. We can just be fact-based, regardless, instead of sort of putting ourselves into corners. If we can be fact-based, you have a greater shot at resolving an issue. And so that, I hope, will be my legacy.
Well, I love that. And I tell people all the time, I want my legacy really to be that knowing I made a difference in other people's lives. Because as you know, I try to help everyone I can, probably to the detriment of my own health. But
I see you do.
But I think I do it because, like I mentioned, I didn't really have that help growing up in the industry. And I don't want people to struggle like I had to struggle to get to where I'm at. So it's important that I do make a difference in people's lives. So
Yeah, and what the nicest thing about you, Kristy, is you're so positive. Every time that I've talked to you, even when you had COVID, you remember that years ago, you came to the our fly-in and you're like, I think
Yep.
I might have COVID. I don't know.
I know, after we were meeting with congressmen. So that was a little interesting.
The point of it is that you're always a positive person, and we can all be negative. There's plenty to be negative about, but choosing positivity, it is a choice, and it can be hard, but the
Yeah.
fact that you're choosing it, I think is just key to your character and key to your own success.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. And listen, it was so awesome and amazing having you here today and talking a little bit about your journey and what is next for IANA, because we are all so excited to see what happens. And with this intermodal growth, it is finally the golden years for intermodal.
Yeah,
So,
let's keep it. Let's do it.
yes. Well, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristy.
And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this chat, please like and subscribe to the channel. We release one podcast a month, plus more content weekly. We'll see you down the track.